Well, hello. Today, it's going to be a little bit different because I'm sitting in a creek. If y'all didn't know it, I'm basically obsessed with water. I have been my whole life. I quite honestly can't get enough of it. And there's a reason for that. I'll get to that. But first, I want to get to this. This is a machete. Now, this machete is not like any other machete. There's one of one. It's right here. This machete has been transformational. Do you know why? It's kind of unassuming, right? It's got a wood sheath, which is super unusual. It's kind of cracked a little bit at the bottom. They took 2 pieces of wood. Some guy in Thailand took 2 pieces of wood, shoved them together to make this sheath. And then he wrapped it. You can see that. Somebody else, because that little plastic twine wrapping came undone, put some duct tape on it. Then the original string that used to go around this person's body came undone over years. So they put this one on it. And then when that ripped and broke, they just tied it into this globular knot here. And it's worked and served them great for years. This machete was a gift. And the man who gave it to me taught me how to build. There's not a lot of people in my life who've taught me how to build. Most of my life growing up, I was conditioned to tear down, to destroy. The people in my life were strategically placed there to corrupt me, to leave me without the understanding of what peace is, to steal from me and take from me and dry me up and leave me like a desert. And that was so familiar to me for so many years of my life that it's taken me months and months now of concentrated rewiring to even get to a place where I can consider the joy of building. Because many of you may not really understand this, but I know some of you do. You've avoided the sweat of your face kind of labor that comes to like home maintenance and home improvement or taking care of the things you own. Like I was not the guy that liked to change the oil to my car. That was not me. You know, I had a dad growing up who was super handy and could fix all kinds of stuff and did all the labor himself for everything. Engines and transmissions and bearings and brake pads and houses and furnaces and ventilation systems, all of it. He did all that stuff. And you know what? He had me come along with him while I was growing up. He showed me lots of these things. He had me help him do some of these projects. And you know what? To me though, it was a chore. And not even just a chore. It was a chore just by being in the presence of someone who was not taking care of me and who was asking me to do something that I didn't really want to do. And at the root of all of our lives is the fact that we are stuck with this dilemma constantly. That there's things that we need to do. There's things that we need to accomplish. And yet there's other things that draw us away from it and make us not capable of doing what we need to do because we inherently just don't want to do it. And that's all it takes, right? Any of you who've tried to teach or share information with somebody else that doesn't want to hear it, no matter how much you tell them, no matter how many persuasive arguments you may lay at their feet, they're just not going to pick it up because they don't care. They don't want to care. I was like that in school with certain subjects. I was the worst nightmare for a lot of teachers. But if I loved that subject, I was the best student in the room. Do you know what I mean by that? I loved and embraced things that I believed to be beneficial and sincerely intriguing to me. But if they weren't, like algebra, When I hit algebra in my mathematics program in school where they're indoctrinating me with all the lies, when I hit that level of mathematics, I found it to be rather belittling. Does that make sense at all? Like, I thought it was foolish because I recognized something the day they handed me a T83 calculator that did all these equations. And I was still growing up in a time where computers were plenty good enough to rock your face off when it came to mathematical equations. And I didn't really need to do anything when it came to most of this kind of work. And so I figured out, you know what? There's these answers in the back of the book. I could just use those. And instead, I don't need to take all these tests in these same ways. I'll just cheat. And so that's what I did for years of my life. I cheated my way through mathematics because I found it to be worthless. And here's the thing. I recognize there's some valid, wonderful, beneficial things that comes through mathematics. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is the system that they use to force children to regurgitate answers that they have put in front of their path. I don't like that system. I enjoy systems where I have a practical application to the things that I'm learning. Otherwise, I find it to be absolutely a waste of my time. And if it's a waste of my time, I'm gonna waste your time. That was kind of my mentality growing up. And it was really, really difficult because sometimes I ran into subject materials that I couldn't cheat my way out of. And I had to learn them. And they were incredibly difficult because I'd failed to build on the foundations from years and years and years before that. Like by the time I got to college and I graduated high school, I took pre-calculus as like my last mathematics class in school. And then I got to college, right? Big university, prestigious school. And you know what I realized? I stinking needed to know the stuff that they were teaching me in there if I wanted to pass the tests. My professor made me take this class called statistics, and it was for psychology. So it wasn't really the main kind of statistics, but it was so that you could understand actual stats that are given in research articles. So like when you pick up and read a research paper, you need to be able to understand the language of what's going on, like the R factor and standard deviations from the mean. And there's kinds of languages that are encoded in there that if you don't know the lingo, you literally can get lied to and manipulated by the data. And that's important. We're going to get back around to that. Statistics was a course where they started it out by giving us an algebra test. Great. You know how I'm going to do on that. It was fantastic because everybody else in the room are psychology, sociology, right? We're people. We want to understand the soul of human beings and how souls interact in groups, right? Most of us took that class so that we wouldn't have to take mathematics, right? So we, by far, 80% of the entire class failed the algebra test. It was abysmal. The professor was just like appalled. At the same time, not really, because she'd been doing this for a lot of seasons. That semester set out to be one of the hardest courses in my entire life. And that class, by mass majority, failed it to such a degree that here's what I learned in universities. If everybody fails, they curve the grades of everybody. Isn't that ridiculous? You can fail a course in college. You know, doctors and people that are like prestigious degreed, they can fail courses in college, but the college, if they think by and far the course maybe was too hard, they'll just curve everybody's grades. So everybody that got D's got C's. Everybody got C's got B's. Everybody got B's got A's. It was ridiculous because over 70% of the people failed the final, and 35% of the people that, or 35% of the people that were participating in the class had failing grade in that class that they'd never had in any other class. And so they thought it was being basically too difficult for them. So that class in statistics taught me a few things. One, everything about you've never thought you knew about college is basically full of lies. Number two, it's really important to understand what is reality when you're reading information that comes from statistics. Statistics are incredibly important, and they govern so much of our life that most of us have just been bedazzled by top headline articles that have some quote about a statistic in a study, like say the effectiveness of a certain drug or pharmaceutical. That is very, very, very well-used data in order to manipulate people. And that's a whole talk that I gave back at a conference called FEIC, where I talked about a gentleman named Edward, not a gentleman, a father of lies. That's literally his title, because he was the engineer of public consent. He figured out how to weaponize consent, and that's called propaganda. So he would utilize things like statistics or the appeal to authority, making people think that just because this person's wearing a white-robed priest outfit, like a doctor's gown, they'll believe what you have to say because, you know, we promise we're the clergy and you can trust us these days. kind of information. Edward Bernays, he wrote a book that was literally on propaganda, and it was just everything to do with propaganda and how you get people to believe and do things against maybe their best natural wishes, but you make them believe they want to do it. And one of the main tools was statistics, because you can manipulate statistics tremendously to say all kinds of things that they don't actually say, but if you don't know their language, they're going to rule over you. And the thing is, that's how I was most of my life. I was being ruled over by statistics, information that was being given to me in a manner that made me believe it to be sincere and true and accurate. But the problem was it was being twisted and connived, because I grew up in a family of serpent eaters, like for real. They really worshiped the serpent, and it was brutal, because you know what the serpent did? Started in the garden for a reason. Because like you see yonder trees behind me? Hold on, let me try to move you. You see those? Those are trees. You know what's so incredible about trees? They do something that most people don't think. Most people think they give food or leaves or roots or trunks. But you know what the one thing a tree does is gives perspective. A tree will give you a different perspective really quick. And I had a friend who I met who was a missionary from Africa. He grew up what they call MK, not talking mind control kind. He grew up with like a missionary kid, child of a missionary in another country. And over there, what was he? Guinea man. Guinea man used to love climbing trees, because Africans climb trees like nobody's business. I met another missionary's kid who was from Tanzania, and that gal could climb a tree like I've never seen in my life. Barefooted, like amazing. Both these people were American family members, descendants of Americans, but they grew up in Africa. One way more towards the equator, and the other one more towards like a giant lake. Because of that, their ability to climb trees gave them a unique perspective on all of the world. And that was the one thing they talked about the most, was the perspective that they had when they were up in the canopy was so unique and so different. I grew up around mountains, so I could go up on high mountaintops and see all kinds of stuff. But then many years now, I've been on the road, no mountains. And because of that, the only way I can get a perspective is up in a tree. And the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Genesis, started out by offering mankind the opportunity for a different perspective. And that was what the dragon wanted the humans to experience. He wanted them to have the knowledge of good and evil, the perspective of good and evil, so that their eyes would be open. This is what he offered them, that their eyes would be open and they would be like Elohim. They would be like a God through that new perspective. And the truth is, it did give us a new perspective. It opened our eyes to seeing this world through two different kinds of lenses. And you know what? There's a brokenness that's in me that still sees the world through those old lenses. And it's really hard to undo, because when I look at a home improvement project, it's hard for me to not see through the stains of bitterness that I had for all of those years in my life where I was being forced into a system of slavery. And I did not have a protector to deliver me out of it. I didn't have somebody paying my wages. I was just earning an income for a family to support a system of criminal behavior. And I hated that, because it went against the idea of what I thought was important for my life destiny. And when you get stuck in a system, like at a job, where you disagree with, inherently disagree with what it is you are doing with your life, it will eat your soul alive, and it will give you a perspective that is skewed to hate it. And you know what? That is the system of the world that has been offered to so many of us. If we just would go to a good school, we could come out and get a good job, meet a good person, have a family, and have a house with a white picket fence and 2.5 children, and we would all just be happy. But you know what? I don't see that, because everybody has swallowed the statistics of that American dream, thinking that it was going to pan out in the end. And the reality is, it's not, because it was not made for us. We were made to live a peculiar and unique life that was one of one. Because you know what the Father compares us to? Two things, predominantly. Trees, which are super unique, like this one. One of one. No other tree exactly like that, anywhere. The other thing he compares us to? Stinking rocks, y'all. They're amazing. Like this one. One of one. There's no other stone like this on the face of the earth. There could be some similar, but there's none exactly like this rock. And you know what? Every time he wanted people to build a tabernacle, a temple, when he wanted us to build a place of memorial and remembrance, it was with stones like this, rough cut, no iron tool working it, not chipped into to fit a shape, not a brick. Do you get what I'm saying? Because you can take a brick and knock it out of a wall and replace it with another brick that's just like it. You can't do that with stones like this, which is why people don't build with them very often, because it's challenging, because it requires something to go in between those spaces, unless you can somehow perfectly fit this one to its neighbor. There's only going to be one other rock on the face of the earth that might fit exactly along this side of it, unless I could somehow heat this rock up and mush it into another one, like Pumapunku, these crazy places where they've done that all over the world. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how they did that, and it's bizarro. Reference these interesting pictures of rocks that look like marshmallows that's shoved together. Polygonal architecture. I think they call it cyclopean architecture. Long story, Genesis 6, gets crazy. Someday I'll get there. These living stones, though, like this one, have a one unique thing that is happening to them that doesn't happen to anything else. And for this one, it's that it was born in this waterway. I don't know if it's born here. I found it here. It gave birth here in my hands because it's been tumbling down this river for a good long minute. And because of that, it's got all those unique shapes and features that make it different from this one. This one's totally different. And you know what? This is how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be like these stones because you know what? Our life is supposed to be buffered by the washing of the water of the word. It's supposed to wash over us. I talk about this a fair amount in my book. You have to read it from the beginning to the end to find this little thread that I wove into it. But each and every one of us is going to be getting hit by the water. Sooner or later, the water of the word is going to run into your life, and it is going to buff it into these edges that you may be carrying in your soul, like bitter edges and anger and strife and envy and murder and all these things that really the Father didn't intend you to have in your life, but that new perspective that we have created features in our rock face, in our roots, that really jacked us up. And you know what? This is there to land us back into the place that we're supposed to be. The washing of the water. I really believe each and every one of you needs to be washed in the water of the word and washed in the living water, flowing water. That's what living water means, is that it moves. Because when water stops moving, it stagnates and dies, which is why every swimming pool you have ever swam in, unless it was really moving water, it was dead. You swam in dead. And I mean, every time I used to see baptisms represented at churches, it was always in dead water. And that was super lame. It always nasty. It was gross. I hated it. But you know what? Baptisms, mikvah, they're not something that takes place once in your life and then you're done. It's something that takes place sometimes every single day. Reference NaMan. Shall I get my sword? Stand fast. Sorry about that. There's bugs on my head. Now, NaMan, commander of the army of the sovereign of Aram, was a great man, Gibor, mighty man of valor, in the eyes of his master and highly respected, because by him Yahuwah had given deliverance to Aram. And though a brave man, he was leprous. Crazy, insane disease. Maybe not even a disease. Open embodiment of a curse from Elohim. And the Armenians had gone out on raids and had brought back a young girl from the land of Yasharel, and she served the wife of NaMan. And she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the Nabi who is in Shamaron, then he would recover him of his leprosy." Real quick, this is a daughter of Israel. She's a child of Israel. And you know what happened to her? She got taken away captive. She's a slave. Does that make sense? She's not generally the slave, the kind that you picture because you've been brainwashed most of your life. Slavery didn't always look like that, nor did it generally have any kind of comparison to that. Slavery was often more what we would call like a bondservant or a servant. Very, very different. They'd had their food, their clothing, their shelter, everything provided to them, and they would live in someone's house and serve them. You wouldn't necessarily beat people all the time just to get your ways. Generally, it was not a good idea when you wanted to cultivate loyalty. But this girl, for all intents and purposes, was ripped out of her home and dropped in the middle of another country and forced to be raised by a family and within a family of people that were not her biological family. Brutal change of perspectives, right? But here's what's super interesting. She has these roots that are in her that come from the land of Yasharel. Really important. She's seen and heard of miracles that take place over there that don't happen anywhere else. And she's going to testify about that. And NaMan went in and reported to his master saying, Thus and thus spoke the girl who was from the land of Yasharel. And the sovereign of Aram said, Go, enter, and let me send a letter to the sovereign of Yasharel. And he went and took with him 10 kikars of silver and 6,000 gold and 10 changes of garments. And he brought the letter to the sovereign of Yasharel, which said, And now, when this letter comes to you, see that I have sent NaMan, my servant, to you, so that you shall recover him of his leprosy. And it came to be, when the sovereign of Yasharel read the letter, that he tore his garments and said, Am I Elohim to kill and keep alive, that this man sends a man to me to recover him of his leprosy? For consider now, and see how he is seeking an occasion with me. And it came to be, when Elisha, the man of Elohim, heard that the sovereign of Yasharel had torn his garments, that he sent to the sovereign, saying, Why have you torn your garments? Please, let him come to me, so that he knows that there is a Nabi, prophet, in Yasharel. So Naaman came with his horses and chariot, and he stood at the entrance of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go, and you shall wash 7 times in the Yarden, that your flesh might be restored to you and be clean. But Naaman became angry and full of wrath, and he went away and said, See, I said to myself, he would certainly come out to me and stand and call on the name of Yahuwah his Elohim, and wave his hand over the place and recover the leprosy. Are not the Abna and the Pharpah, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Yasharel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? And he turned and went away in a rage. And his servants came near and spoke to him and said, My father, if the Nabi had spoken to you a great matter, would not you have done it? How much more than when he says to you, Wash and be clean? Then he went down and dipped 7 times in the Yarden, according to the word of the man of Elohim. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. This is a man who had a different perspective, right? He was raised in a society that never said, wash in the water and you'd be healed. And if anything, these people definitely knew how to bathe. Okay, real quick, I just got to deal with something that gets propagated by most people. That gets propagated by most people as a reality, when it is really likely total doofusville. Okay, you ready for this? You ever heard the saying that people back in the old days basically never bathed? They'd be like, oh yeah, once a year they'd have a bath. And they would heat up the water, and the dad would bathe himself first. And then the second, and then the third, until the youngest child was bathed in the dirtiest water. And so the baby would sink in that water, and sometimes you didn't want to throw the baby out with the bath water. You heard that phrase before? And they're like, that's where it comes from. No, you guys. People weren't idiots when it came to showering and bathing. It's not a new thing that just happened because we have plumbed piping in our houses. You know what they've always had in the world? Water. For real. It never goes away. It's always there. It's always been there. Because the whole earth was nothing but water. No, for real. It says in the beginning, Yahuwah created the heavens and the earth was formless and without void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Water. Water was there. And water will be there all the way until the end. Because he is all about water. Water flows straight out of his throne. It's so incredible. And is full of life. And I believe the water systems of the earth are completely interconnected. You know, when there's gigantic earthquakes in one part of the world, like Alaska in the 1960s, massive earthquake, one of the biggest ever recorded up there.
The epicenter of the March 27th earthquake was located about 80 miles from Anchorage in a region of high, rugged mountains. The earthquake produced significant damage to structures and property over a land area of 50,000 square miles. Ice was cracked or buckled on lakes in an area of 100,000 square miles. The quake was recorded throughout the world. This dock, for example, was raised far above high tide level. What were the major effects at population centers such as Anchorage? The damage? estimated at more than $200 million. It was caused both by seismic shock and by landslides triggered by the quake. This is what happened in downtown Anchorage. The geologists found that earthquake vibrations themselves caused less heavy damage than the vibration-induced sliding and settling of weak deposits beneath the city. From the chaotic jumble of wreckage, geological survey teams pieced together what happened at Turnagain Heights. Elsewhere in Alaska, violent ground motion triggered thousands of snow avalanches and rock slides. Many of these blocked or threatened the Alaska Railroad and the highway system. Numerous ground cracks, areas of subsidence, and mud spouts occurred throughout the zone of damage. Glacier ice broke into huge precipices throughout much of central Alaska. The city of Valdez, located at the head of a deep, steep-sided fjord, was completely crippled by a sudden submarine landslide. This once active port was destroyed when a block of ground 1,200 feet wide sank into the sea. A seaman aboard the steamship Chena filmed Valdez Harbor during the earthquake. Seawater poured over the slide escarpment. The cannery slid into the sea. 30 people lost their lives as the town dock pitched into the bay. This is all that remained on the waterfront when it was over. Submarine landslides triggered by the quake generated huge sea waves. In Valdez Passage, one of these waves deposited debris 220 feet above sea level and destroyed the navigation light. Waves breaking over the land sheared off trees 100 feet above the beach. At the Indian village of Chiniga, a wall of water 90 feet high swept away all but the school and one house.
Right up there. It was shaking the earth in such an intense and measurable way that places thousands and tens of thousands of miles away, like in Florida, lakes and waterways and rivers and waters in lakes and oceans were moving noticeably like a piston during the course of the earthquake, which tells me that there's a piping system like a bathysphere that's interconnected through all the Earth's water supplies, which is why there's tides, because the moon's not causing a tide, y'all. Just something to consider, because if it's so powerful that it can move the oceans of the Earth by just passing over it, and it can't move a body of water as small as a creek or a river or a lake, like there's big lakes out there, huge, gigantic lakes, like Lake Superior. You know what it doesn't have? Tides. Why? Why don't the tiny ponds that are in your backyard have tides? Because they're not connected to the plumbing system of the earth where all those pistons and fountains of the deep are functioning. Reference these fountains of the deep that I shoved my face inside of when I was down in Florida one time. I love water. And you know what? Yahuwah does too. And he also loves truth. So don't believe the lies that you've been given your whole life that lead you to believe something not miraculous is taking place. Like, oh yeah, the moon passed over and that's why there's a tide. No. Yahuwah created an entire, unique, intricate system that's below your feet that you can't even start to comprehend how beautiful and complex it is. But he loves you so much that he will bring water out of the depths of the earth to water the fields so that you can eat bread by the sweat of your face. I was down in Florida last year and I got an opportunity to use this to build. And you know why that happened? Because the Father told me to go wash and be healed. He told me to get in the water every single day. And that's what I did. And you know what it did? It made my mind lose some of those scales that had been placed on over it. And it gave me a new perspective. It allowed me to get my body healing in areas that I didn't even know were so broken, because water will wash you and rewire you. Cold water specifically, like the one I'm sitting in right now, which is frigid. But you know what? It's rewiring my circulation system, because at its nature, water will do one thing, cold water, essentially. It will actually break up toxins that are in your blood system, because your blood is super full of poisons, y'all. You've been eating poison, breathing poison, wearing poison, and swimming and drinking poison since you were born. Basically, your entire life. So your blood is full of toxic things that are in it. Cold water allows those toxins to get broken up. And then what happens is, after, say, you go sit in cold water for 1 minute or 3 minutes, after you get out, you should exercise. Move your body, go for a walk, 15 minutes. Just get your body back to warm. Get out of that water while wearing your linen. And then put on dry linen. Don't dry yourself off. Just put on dry linen. Go for a walk. Go for a little jog. Do some push-ups or sit-ups. Or stinking move quickly. You know what I mean? It'll warm your body up, because you'll be cold. And your body's going to have this massive capillary reaction when you got cold. And it's going to shrink. All of these vessels are going to tighten up. And it's going to hurt. Like, my ears hurt like crazy mad. And different places of my body and other people's bodies hurts more. This other guy told me that when he would go in the cold water, his collarbone would just hurt like crazy. And he didn't have an injury that he knew of on his collarbone. But after a while, it went away. And that's because your circulation system is being able to dive into different areas than it ever had been. And then when you go out for that warm-up, all those capillaries and all those blood vessels will open up and expand. And then all those toxins that have been broken up and forced out of your muscles and forced out of your body, they get put into the blood supply and or into your excretion systems of your body, your detoxing systems like your kidneys. And so you can pee them out or poop them out. And it's amazing. Or sweat it out, because that's how we get rid of toxins. The sweat of our face, peeing and pooping. And we need all of those to happen on a regular basis, which is why you should eat living bread, because it'll let you poop. And most of you all are taking stuff so you can poop, because you're taking other drugs that are making you constipated. So take living bread into your body and it will heal you. Swim in the water, and then you can cleanse yourself of that. And the third thing you know that water does that's so amazing, it will give you some chutzpah. It will grow some balls on men. Do you know what I mean by that? More delicate way of saying it is, will increase your constitution. Give you some manliness, men. Give you some ladiness, ladies, because we all need it in our lives. Because we need new perspectives in order to battle this dragon that's all around us. And when I was down there in Florida, I got this chance to do this. I got to build with a man who used this machete, this was his father's machete, to build houses in Thailand for people that were sharing the gospel and the good news to everyone they could. Because, you know what? They didn't have houses, but this man knew how to build them. And so that's what he did. All over the world, wherever he went, he builds houses. And you know what? I'm going to start sharing with y'all my journey of learning how to build my first house. And you know what that'll look like? Probably one of one, just like this machete. Because when he gave it to me, it had a PVC handle, for real, on the bottom here. The rest of the handle was flying off. So when I would swing my machete with him, it would fly off the handle. He gave this to me because the little tiny baby machete that I was using just wasn't hacking it. And one night he came out of the forest and he gave me two machetes. This one and another one that was much smaller that had been broken when he was hacking into a tree. He gave me both of those. And then him and I rehafted this machete handle with some oak, and then it's full of sapphires. See that? Of course I put sapphires in there. Some copper, because I absolutely love copper, and copper and water is amazing. I just embedded a bunch of rubies and gemstones into this handle. So fun. I'd always wanted to do that. And now I finally got a chance to do it. And I love it. And this is the one that I first built my house with. I started out by building a greenhouse. It was about 2,000 square feet. And we did it out of the materials that were growing on the farm, which is so incredibly unique. And most people never do it. But I'm going to share with you guys some of that journey, because most people don't know how to build a high tunnel. Sorry, not a greenhouse. It's really a high tunnel. We built a high tunnel for like $1,500. And we did it out of bamboo that was growing all around us. And if you guys don't know about bamboo, it's time to learn, because you can grow bamboo in a lot of the country, like way more of the country than you thought. If your climate zone, what do they call them? Basically, the area that you live in will have a ranking in its system of hardiness zones. That will kind of give you an idea of like what's the coldest cold that your area gets to. And so this will help you know what kind of plants that you can plant in your area. Well, if your hardiness zone stays above -20 at its coldest, you can plant bamboo there, because bamboo grows all over the earth. And I know it's a grass, but it's basically like a wood, which is incredible. And you can eat it, and it'll grow a living fence for you that you could then use to build things with for the rest of your life, because it'll grow like 20, 30, 40, 50 feet in a month and a half or 2 months. It's amazing stuff, you guys. And it also filters out nasty, skanky water. Like if you live in a mucky, nasty water area, it'll filter your water for you. It just loves you that much. 2 varieties, clumping variety, which will grow basically in a clump, and then running variety, which grows like a spine and can shoot off in all kinds of directions. Most people up north are familiar with the clumping or with the running variety, but there's clumping varieties that are more for a temperate climate that will stay right where you put them. And then if you plant clumping varieties next to each other, in a line, it'll make a living fence for like cattle, sheep, oxen, stuff like that. Water buffaloes, because I know we have a lot of those here. Anyways, this was my first opportunity to do that. And I wanted to share some of that with you guys because it changed my life and gave me a new perspective. While I was working with that man, I got to see what it was like through a not bitter lens of how he sees the world when he's building something for somebody else, how he improves the environment around him, how he serves other people by meeting their needs through the work of his hands. And I love that. And I was delighted to do that. And it changed me. And it blessed me tremendously. And it revived my soul like the soul of a child. Not all the way, I'll admit it. I'm still pretty pissed off a lot of times. And I don't share that in a lot of my videos until I get on stage and I can scream. You know what I mean? Because it's really awkward to just sit around and commiserate with yourself. It's not the same as like when I'm in front of a bunch of people and I can talk to them about it. And I used to do that a lot because I worked in mental health for many years. So I got to talk about a lot of these deep wounds that I had and other people had experienced in their lives. And you know what's interesting? Because I've aired those portions of my soul, those people felt brave and encouraged and vulnerable enough to share those things too. And I hope each of you would be willing to do that with each other, because that's what we all need. We need each other in our lives so we can share these wounds and these weariness and the aches and the pains in our hearts so that we can be rewired, so that we can have our circulatory system washed and cleansed, and we can have our identity secured. Because you know what? Naaman's identity was a gibor. He was a mighty man of valor. And you know what he wasn't? A leper. Because Yahweh did not destine him to be a leper. But you know what? Had to die in the water when Naaman went into that water. What died there? It was not the leprosy. It was his pride. It was his pride that died there. And that was the perspective that the tree of knowledge and good and evil gave him, was that he was mightier than the other men. Because if you fight people in battle, if you are a conqueror of other human beings, if you've taken lives and you've killed another human being, like if I've taken this machete, I never used this machete for anything but building. But if this was one of my blades that I had used in my tradecraft that I used to participate in, I would look at this blade very differently. Because you know what it would be? A stumbling block. Because with these tools, once you take a human life, it makes you think that you have power over life. And you know what? You may have, for a moment, taken someone's life. But you know what you can't steal? Their immortality. Because if that person was made to be raised again to eternal life, you can never take that from them. You can never steal that from another human being. You might temporarily have an authority to take their body's life, but you can never steal another human being's soul. The Father is all about people giving their lives up, surrendering their lives to Him, and realizing the one thing you need to give up in your life is your self-sovereignty, that you are not your own man, that you are not your own woman, that you are not your own child. You are His. You are Yasharel. You are Israel. You are a Hebrew person. And you know what the really identity of a Hebrew is? Someone who's crossed over from that land that they came from and is crossed over into His kingdom and is walking their way through the wilderness with Him, following His fire by night and His cloud by day, being fed the bread that falls down from heaven. And that is Yeshua the Messiah. He is the Savior of the earth. And His word became flesh. This word became flesh and made its dwelling amongst us so that we could come to know Him, that we could be cleansed with living water, and that out of our innermost beings could flow rivers of living water so that we would never thirst again. But you know what? Until the day of that understanding comes to you, you will be a slave and a brick in that system. You will have those bitter scales over your eyes, and you'll be forced into a system that makes you listen and obey the way they tell you to do it. But you know what? Yahweh is about giving you the choice that you are sovereign to submit to him. And whatever he says to do will bring you life. If Naaman had walked away from Elisha in that moment and not humbled himself at the words of his servant, he would be a leper until his death, not the Gibor. But he was made to be a mighty man. And because of that, because of his humility, and he washed himself 7 times, he was restored. And I want you all to be restored. I want your bodies to be restored. That's why we're so obsessed with talking to you guys about health. Because when I go to conferences, you guys, when I meet so many people, when I go into churches and I speak and I preach there, wherever I go, you guys, I see so much ill health, dis-ease, disorder, and despair. I see the body is riddled with brokenness. And I'm talking about physical ailments that are in and on your flesh, you guys. And you must be willing to radically change your life so that you can enter into a freedom that is like nothing you can even start to understand. Your health is a pure and wonderful thing to cherish. And it all started with my body and my wife's and I's body with spring water. It started with drawing water out of a spring. And we started drinking spring water, and then we started eating organically. And that led us on a journey of to where now we farm on other people's lands for free. We serve on their lands by the sweat of our face, just so we can eat their food that they grow out of their farms, their organic produce, so that we can have access to that for free. That's our trade. Because I realized basically the 2 most important things in my life bodily are a good place to live and a good food to eat. And I knew that the good place to live was wherever the Father wanted us to be. And it was generally not in a city. It was in a place where there was creation like this abounding. And there was a place where that I could get food for my family that would nourish us and satisfy us. Because the food that we have been eating is designed to kill us. And I know the Father has set his food here in his creation to give us life. I hope you guys will live abundantly today. And that you will plunge yourselves in that water 7 times. Every day if you have to. So that you can come out refreshed and renewed. I love you all. I'll talk to you soon.